Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast. This is episode 152 with repeat guest Bryan Haywood. And today we will sit down and just focus on confined space entry rescue operations only. Bryan, let's do just a little bit of a history on confined space rescues and just kind of if you could help out the audience with all the different knowledge and things that you've done, because I've done a great job of planning and practicing and doing stuff, but I've never done an actual rescue before.
Yeah. Yeah, sure, David. So the rescue element is probably the most difficult element for an employer to comply with. And in my experience, I mean, I can't give you a certified number, but I would probably say 75 to 80% of the audits that we do, we find significant failures in the rescue portion of an employer's confined space program. And most of the reason is you've probably seen it throughout your career where you flip over the permit and the rescue plan just has three numbers, 911. And that is, I give OSHA credit in the last 5-6 years, maybe a little bit longer, maybe last 10 years, they've put out some one-page safety alerts about 911's not a rescue plan for entry and so forth. I have written dozens, maybe close to 50 different articles on Safety Eng, trying to explain to people the ins and outs of rescue and what actually happens at a fire department when you call 911 and you need a rescue team, and how all that goes down. But just to sort of give everybody an overview, rescue basically has two options. The first option is the preferred option, and that's what we call non-entry rescue. And that would be a rescue performed by the attendant outside the space. And, there's a lot of flaws with that style of rescue. Whenever I go to a client, I have them do a mock rescue, and that's their annual mock rescue drill. We'll set the tripod up, and tripods are death traps, in my opinion. People just think if I have a tripod and a winch, I'm good. So you got two people down there, you winch the first person out, and you realize now that you have a tag line in one hand and a hook from a tripod winch in another, and those two things are not compatible. And so you don't have a mechanical means to get that second person out because the hook is the D-ring is not attached to the winch system. You just got a rope that's, a loose rope that's their tagline. And so you don't have a mechanical means to get someone out from a non-entry rescue standpoint. So winches work great for vertical entries and a single entrant. But other than that, winches and tripods really do have significant limitations. But, the non-entry rescue, which I said is the preferred means, is the only option that has an exception to it. And in all my years of participating in confined space rescues or entries and doing permitting and so forth, thousands of entries in my time, me not being the interim, but either being the entry supervisor or being the safety manager over the program. Maybe one or two were logically, we exempted the non-entry rescue requirement because, you're going into a very small space and your harness could get hung up on a bolt or some kind of penetration into the space, and you get your bracket on your 5-point body harness, your leg bracket buckle gets caught on that, and you can't get your hands from out in front of you back to undo that, and they can't pull you out, you're stuck. Those kind of things are what OSHA said that, hey, if this non-entry rescue is not going to aid in rescue or could create a greater hazard to the entrant, then the entry supervisor can exempt non-entry rescue. But unless you get that exemption, you've got to have a mechanical means of rescue. It needs to be manually operated. It needs to have a 4-to-1 mechanical advantage. It's got to be a tagline. The entrants should be wearing 5-point body harnesses and be hooked up to a tagline. You should have an anchor point outside. You should, like I said, you should have mechanical means of rescue. manual mechanical means of rescue. You can use an electronic winch or something like that, but manuals, especially if you can't see the entrant, manuals the way you want to go, because you could cause severe injury if someone gets hung up and you're just cranking them out with a hydraulic or electric winch. But those are that's your first sort of, in a flow chart, that's your first option, non-entry rescue. And you have to have that unless the entry supervisor says it's not going to aid in rescue or it's going to create a greater hazard. That's the only exception. The other mistake people make is a lot of people think that, hey, if I've got non-entry rescue, then I don't have to do the entry style rescue, which is a rescue team, whether it be offsite or an on-site team. And that's not the way it works. There are no exceptions. If you are doing a permitted entry, and that means that we go back to one of our first discussions, we talked about the 3 entry methods that OSHA allows. C5, which is the alternative entry where you only have an atmospheric hazard and you can show that forced air ventilation can control that hazard. C7, which is reclassification, which means you don't have an atmospheric hazard. You don't even have a potential for an atmospheric hazard. And you have eliminated all the other hazards which made that confined space a permit required confined space. And if you do C7, the reclassification, then you don't have to have rescue because you basically have reclassified the space to a non-permit status while that reclassification safeguards are in place. But if you're doing an entry permit, which is sections D through K, then rescue applies and you will always, always, always be required to have a rescue plan, even if you have non-entry rescue in place, or, you're saying, okay, I'm going to do an attendant rescue. Those things can fail. And so the standard doesn't give you an option in section K to say, I can do this permitted entry and I don't have to have a rescue plan, or I don't have to have a rescue team, whether it be on site or off site. And so I always tell everybody, and I think we've mentioned this before, is just go back and look at, it's either J3 or J4, which J is the entry supervisor's roles and responsibilities. And I think it's J3, but it may be J4. Basically says that the entry super has to verify rescue services are available and the means to summon them are operable. Okay. Well, what that means is before that entry supervisor can sign off on that entry permit, he or she has called the fire department or has called the security gate and verified that the in-house rescue team is available or the fire department is available for rescue. And then OSHA finally got it right in the construction standard that came out in 2015. And in that standard, it says that the rescue service has to agree that when they become unavailable, they will communicate that unavailability back to those entry supervisors that have basically called and said, hey, we need you to be on standby. And that means the entry would have to be terminated because now there's no longer an entry rescue service available. Even if you have non-entry rescue capability, you always have to comply with the entry rescue requirements. And a lot of folks don't realize that there's not 6-8 firefighters sitting in a firehouse somewhere waiting for you to call for a confined space rescue. These fire departments are made up of firefighters, paramedics, at 6-7 different firehouses in a moderately sized town. And when you call 911 and say, hey, I've got someone trapped in a space, that first in engine company very well may get there in 5 minutes. And one of those people, one of those 4 firefighters, or if there's 4 on the first in engine company, there may be 2 or 3, but if there's 4 and one of them may be on the rescue team. However, the equipment that they're needing is not on that truck, right? There's a rescue truck or a heavy duty rescue truck at one of those firehouses. And when that captain on that first in engine company shows up, he or she's going to realize, oh my gosh, this is actually a rescue. We need to summon the special rescue team, which means the fire department's going to have a paramedic from firehouse number 4 is on the team, a firefighter from firehouse number 3 is on the team, a couple lieutenants from firehouse 1 and 7 are on the team. So all these people who are on shift that make up the special rescue team, they have to respond to the site with the equipment from usually on the heavy rescue unit. And then they have to don all their gear to effect rescue. And you could be looking at 15, 20 minutes, maybe even longer, depending on weather conditions, traffic conditions, and so forth. So this is what they mean by, when that supervisor calls that firehouse, or that you have to have a communication plan. You just can't, that supervisor from, XYZ chemical company that's going to be the entry supervisor for this entry into the storage tank, he or she just can't call 911 and say, "Hey, I'm reporting. I need the fire department to be standby."
Right.
You got to have a communication plan. Like, what number do I call? Who do I speak to put my name on the list? Right. And fire departments are starting to learn the hard way as companies start to realize that, hey, I've got to call and verify the fire department's available. And let's say the big city, the fire department could have 10 entries going on, and they basically say, okay, we're available for these 10 entries at 5 different facilities. When they go to the house fire, 45 minutes later, they've agreed that they're going to then notify those 5 different facilities that we're no longer available because all of our resources are no longer available. We're over here at this house fire, which in turn means that those entries have to end because there's no longer a rescue plan in place. And companies don't like that idea, right? They just like to continue doing their entries, but that's the way it's supposed to work. And that's why most of them, fail on their face value, is the entry super is not verifying that an external rescue team is available if they're using a fire department. Most of them don't. If it's internal, I was very fortunate in my career that every plant I worked at, we had an internal rescue team. But we had to have a policy written that said, there'll always be 6 rescuers available during an entry. Sometimes, if it was an IDLH entry, immediately dangerous life and health type entry, or the atmosphere could potentially become IDLH, that required us to effect rescue in less than 3 minutes, which meant that we had to take those operators and mechanics and engineers who were on the rescue team and take them out of their normal jobs and put up a little, Costco tent and set them there in chairs, 95% donned in their PPE, just not on breathing air. So if something happened, they could literally put their mask on, go on breathing air, and go in and get these people. And, if it's not IDLH in type entry, we would let them stay in their units and continue their normal work. And then if something happens, sound an alarm and they could go, get them out. But if there was an atmospheric hazard, we used a 3 to 5 minute rescue window. And we get that number from the OSHA non-mandatory rescue evaluation checklist that's in 1910-146. I think it's Appendix D, but it could be, it's one of the last appendices, and it's non-mandatory, but it's a great tool. And so if you're doing an entry into a space that has potential IDLH and the fire department is your rescue team, that means you've got an arrangement that, some off-duty firefighters who are on the rescue team are going to come to your facility, and you're going to pay them and they're off duty to be your standby team at the entry portal. And again, most companies don't do that. So I always like to tell everybody, is like, well, how long can you hold your breath? Because the number one killer in a confined space is oxygen deficient atmosphere. And it's like, all right, you pass out. How long are you going to be able to stay in there and not be both clinically dead and biologically dead when the fire department shows up? And, so we try to do everything we can to prevent that from happening. And we put protection measures in place if there is an event, but the last chance you have is that rescue, whether it be non-entry or entry. And, most people's non-entry falls flat on its face because, the the tripod's not being inspected annually, the winch is not being inspected annually. Hell, we find people using equipment lifting devices, not personnel rated lifting devices, but equipment lifting devices for rescue. And the new standard, the construction standard, actually says if you're using a device that's not third party certified as a personnel lifting device, and you have to have a PE certified as a human lifting device. And just all kind of opportunities to think that you have rescue, but when you go to enact that rescue, it's going to fall flat on its face. So I always like to tell people when they show me their breathing air units or apparatus, and it's an SCBA, and I'm like, well, you got a 28-inch opening on one of your tanks. You're not going to fit through that with an SCBA, so you need airline with backup air, hip air. Companies don't want to spend the money for their rescue team to have the proper breathing apparatus to be able to fit through the openings and to be able to work inside some of these spaces. So it's another world to train. If you take a hazmat person or a fire brigade person, you could probably train them in 3 days on how to be a confined space rescue tech. And that's just rescue. Now, that's not high angle rescue. That's a whole nother ball game, which is another flaw a lot of people have. So you're doing a vertical entry on a 30-foot tall tank, and you get the person out, but you don't have the rigging to be able to get them from the 30-foot top of the tank down to the ambulance.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's what we call high angle rescue. And a lot of companies don't have that capability. So again, it's from A to Z. You have to be able to evaluate that rescue team, make sure they have the right number, the right training, the right equipment, and the right skills to be able to get your people out, get them packaged. Right. There's nothing in 146K that talks about packaging an injured person. So someone falls inside a permit required confined space and hurts their back. Your non-entry rescue is done. You just can't start winching them out. You have to have an entry, even though it's not a, atmospheric hazard, but you have to go in and package those people, C-collar, spine board, Stokes basket, the whole 9 yards. And again, a lot of companies don't have the equipment or the training on how to package an entrant who's been injured from a fall or somebody dropped something on them from, up above. So if you say you have a rescue team, that means you have a fully staffed, competent, equipped, trained rescue team that can do all types of rescue, vertical, horizontal, multi-level, the whole 9 yards. And there's a few of my clients that do it right. And I would say they probably spend $50,000 a year on training, mock rescues, new equipment, inspection, all that. So that's just on their confined space rescue. So it's a major investment. I try to tell most of my clients, look, if you're only doing 4 or 5 entries a year, you need to find you a good standby company. And there's a lot of them out there that will come on site and perform standby duties for your 4 or 5 entries. You sort of schedule all of them at the same time over the same week, and you pay this, certified contractor who does confined space rescue, and they're on site. They put a rescue plan together for all your entries, and that's who you rely on. And then, you're getting good quality service, and you're not putting your people in, IDLH atmospheres with, improperly inspected and maintained equipment. That's just something you don't want to get into. But that's sort of the high level summary of Section K, the non-entry rescue and entry rescue. And 911 is not a rescue plan. I'll end on that and turn it back over to you.
Well, with that said, I hate to say it, but as a young safety professional, I thought that was a rescue plan until I really kind of dove down into the details, talked to the local firehouse. One thing that really helped out a lot. Gosh, I hate to say in building a bridge or just kind of communicating was having open house with those guys and saying, all right, let's do some practicing together. You guys can see all the confined spaces, and then you really get a chance to talk to the guys and really understand what they can and can't do for you. So
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely, I just kind of figured I'll have somebody call, and this was like way before the days of having a cell phone. So somebody would have to radio down to the guard shack. The guard shack, of course, would have the phone. The guard shack would then call them and all that. One thing that was lucky with me is that they just happened to be a couple hundred yards on down the road. So it was really nice that they were close. We talked to them and convinced them to leave all the stuff on the truck at all times, and all that stuff. So I won't say I was doing it right, but I think I was a lot better than most folks eventually out there. Just kind of peeling that onion back. We did a lot of practicing, and luckily we never had to really go in and ever actually execute this. It was just practice. But you can
Yeah.
look but you can look at how it feels like at least once every week, maybe once every 2 weeks, you can find a confined space accident posted someplace. You know,
Oh yeah.
um,
Yeah. There
yep,
was just one
and
at a sugar plant that a person died, and it was the would-be rescuer. We always say that the would-be rescuers, that's 50%. Well, I think it's closer to 60% now. I haven't talked to my contact at NIOSH, but the numbers were increasing of the who dies. And the sugar plant, I can't remember where it was at. Maybe Wisconsin, but it was a sugar facility. And they had workers in the wastewater treatment plant to replace a pump, and one worker went down and another worker came over and found him passed out, and he went in. Well, the worker who originally went down was the first one to get rescued, and he survived, and the would-be rescuer is the one that perished.
oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that was 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago.
Okay, I want to go back and look that one up. So was that from an oxygen deficient atmosphere or?
H2S.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
gotcha. Luckily, I never had to mess around with that stuff. A lot of my other friends have a lot of awful stories about that. But for me, I mean, I've read about it, and that's it for me. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it's a major problem. I mean, it's natural human instinct. You see a coworker down and you haven't been properly trained. You don't know why they passed out, so your natural instinct is to go in to get them. And that's they've always said more than 50% of deaths in confined spaces are what we call would-be rescuers. And I think the number's gone up. One, because entry, we've after 30 years, we've gotten better at doing our entries. We're doing better on isolation. We're doing better with permitting. We're doing better with atmospheric monitoring. But the sidebar people, the people around that maybe haven't been trained in entry protection or entry operations, it's just natural instinct. You see somebody go down and you go in and try to help them, and you'll be overcome. So it's
yeah.
sad.
Yep. And many times it's also friends. It just
Yeah.
isn't that person that you kind of know and don't know. I mean, it's like literally friends. So um and so that makes it a whole lot harder, and that just kicks in even more of that. I got to get out there and help. No.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's
So
natural instinct. I guess it's a good thing in humanity that we want to help, but it causes a lot of cause half the deaths in confined spaces are would be rescuers. So if
yes.
we could prevent that, we would cut the deaths from 300 a year down to 150 a year.
Right. Bryan, we are bumping up on time here. This was fantastic. I probably didn't ask a quarter of what I wanted to ask, so maybe I can twist your arm and get you back on again in the future, and we can kind of go over more of the common scenarios that you've seen out there and all that stuff.
Sure. I mean,
So
be my pleasure, David.
awesome. If you could take a couple seconds and let people know how that they can find you for more info on all this stuff.
Sure. Sure. So you can find me at my website, safetyengineering.net, but it's safetyeng, SAFTENG.net. You can reach me by email at brian@safetyeng.net. And then you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can join the Safety Engineering Net LinkedIn group or the Safety Engineering Facebook group and join in all the discussions, which confined space is always a hot topic. But that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Thank you, Bryan. Thank you. I know that I get a lot of info just off your off of LinkedIn, your Facebook page,
Mm-hmm.
and all that good stuff. So thank you so much for running that and really helping to get that information out to folks.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, and thank you so much. And with that, episode 152 is complete with Bryan Haywood, four-time, hopefully 5 and 6 and 7-time return guests in the future. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Have a safe day.